Suk set down her chopsticks, looked Amara directly in the eyes, and said it without blinking. "You will never be one of us, no matter how long you sit at this table." Amara didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply placed her hands flat on the table, the same table her husband had told her was her home, and felt something inside her go very, very quiet. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst time. But it was the moment Amara Williams realized that loving someone completely does not protect you from being destroyed by the people they love. The man she married was Tae-jun, one of the most feared names in Seoul, and he had no idea what happened inside his own house every single time he walked out the door. If this were your home and these were your husband's people, how long could you stay silent? Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like this one, raw, real, and impossible to look away from, drop on this channel every week. And when you're done watching, leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Amara Williams did not come into Kang Tae-jun's life during his best years. She came during the years nobody talks about. The years before the cars, before the estate on the hill, before men in dark suits stopped whatever they were doing when Tae-jun entered a room. She met him when he was 26, running short money operations out of a rented office in Mapogu, surviving on strategy and stubbornness. She was 23, finishing a graduate program in international business, sharing a cramped apartment with 2 roommates in Hongdae, and completely unprepared for the kind of man he already was. Their first real conversation happened at a dinner party neither of them had wanted to attend. She thought he was arrogant. He thought she was the most direct person he'd ever met in his life, and direct people made him nervous because he couldn't read them easily. He spent most of that evening watching her from across the room, the way you watch a fire. Not because you're afraid, but because something about it refuses to let your eyes go somewhere else. They talked for 3 hours. About everything. About nothing. About the kind of things people usually wait months to say. By the end of the night, Tae-jun had given her his private number. Not the one he handed to business contacts, but the one only 4 other people in the world possessed. Amara called it 2 days later, just to see if he'd answer. He picked up on the first ring. She didn't know then what that meant, that Kang Tae-jun, a man who let calls go unanswered for days simply because he could, answered her call before the second ring even completed. She learned it later, much later, when she understood him better than she understood herself. What she did know, from the very beginning, was that something about this man made the world feel more solid beneath her feet. He wasn't warm in the way people described warmth. He didn't compliment her easily or say beautiful things simply to say them. But when Tae-jun looked at her, really looked, she felt like every single part of her had been accounted for. Not romanticized, not idealized, just seen. That was the thing about Tae-jun that nobody outside their relationship ever understood. The man the world saw, cold, controlled, capable of silences that made grown men flinch, was not the man who called Amara at midnight just to hear her voice when a deal went sideways. That was not the man who remembered, a full year later, that she had mentioned once, that her grandmother used to make sweet potato pie on cold Sundays, and then somehow arranged for her to have one delivered to her apartment during a February ice storm without any explanation or fanfare. He was complicated, deeply, inconveniently complicated. And Amara loved him with her whole chest. They married quietly, 3 years into what everyone around Tae-jun had assumed was just a phase. No grand ceremony, a small gathering, a restaurant, people they actually trusted. Amara wore something simple and impossibly elegant. Tae-jun wore a dark suit and the expression of a man who has just won something he knows he doesn't fully deserve. His family smiled through the entire evening. Amara noticed, even then, even in the joy of that night, that the smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was not being paranoid. The Kang family estate sat in one of the quieter, older neighborhoods of Seoul, behind walls that didn't announce themselves, and gates that didn't need a sign to communicate that outsiders were not encouraged. It was the kind of house that had absorbed decades of wealth without ever trying to display it. Heavy furniture, high ceilings, the specific hush of a place that has always had staff and has never had to explain itself. Tae-jun had grown up inside those walls, and he believed, genuinely, without any particular arrogance, that placing his wife there meant he was placing her somewhere safe. He was wrong. In the beginning, Amara tried. She tried. She learned phrases in Korean before she even moved in. Not tourist phrases, but the kind of language that signaled respect and effort and a desire to belong. She asked Mi-suk about recipes, about family traditions, about the correct way to do small things that she understood carried weight in Korean household culture. She included Soo-jin in conversations, asked about her life, remembered details, and brought them up later the way you do when you're genuinely interested in a person. Mi-suk, Tae-jun's mother, a woman in her early 60s who carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who has never once needed to raise her voice to be obeyed, received every one of these efforts with a smile that was technically warm and emotionally closed. "Your Korean is improving," she would say, in a tone that simultaneously acknowledged the effort and reminded you that there was still a long way to go. "Soo-jin has so many friends already," she would add when Amara attempted to bond with Tae-jun's younger sister. "She keeps very busy." Soo-jin, 28 and beautiful in the effortless way of someone who has never had to work particularly hard for anything, was not hostile the way their mother was. She was something more cutting. She was indifferent. She spoke around Amara rather than to her. She organized things, dinners, movie nights, shopping trips, in group chats that Amara was not added to, and when Amara found out through the visible aftermath of those events, Soo-jin would look genuinely puzzled, as if the idea that Amara might want to be included simply hadn't occurred to her. "I didn't think it was really your thing," Soo-jin said once, about a family dinner that had taken place 3 rooms away from where Amara sat alone eating reheated food from the kitchen. Amara had stared at her. "It's a dinner, with my husband's family. How is that not my thing?" Soo-jin had tilted her head slightly and said nothing, which was somehow worse than any answer she could have given. Dae-sung was Tae-jun's paternal uncle, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s who had spent his entire adult life operating in Tae-jun's orbit, first as an advisor, then as someone who benefited significantly from Tae-jun's rising power. He was charming in the practiced way of men who are always calculating. Around Tae-jun, he praised the marriage constantly, called Amara impressive, used the word international like it was a compliment, when it was really just a sophisticated way of saying foreign. When Tae-jun wasn't in the room, Dae-sung spoke to Amara, the way certain people speak to children, not with cruelty exactly, but with a baseline condescension that assumed she wouldn't fully understand what was happening. He interrupted her mid-sentence at shared meals. He redirected conversations away from her observations. He answered questions that had been addressed to her as though her voice had a built-in delay. And all 3 of them, Mi-suk, Soo-jin, Dae-sung, had a gift that Amara came to understand only gradually, slowly, the way you come to understand a storm that builds without lightning. They were exceptional at being one thing in front of Tae-jun and something else entirely the moment he was gone. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it so insidious. There were no screaming confrontations in the early months, no slurs thrown across dinner tables. It was smaller than that and somehow larger. It was the way conversation stopped when Amara walked into a room and resumed only on different, more closed topics once she sat down. It was the way decisions about the household, small ones, large ones, anyone's, were made and executed without her knowledge or input, as though she were a guest whose preferences were politely irrelevant. It was the way Mi-suk could look directly at her and say something in rapid Korean to Soo-jin, and then turn back to Amara with a serene expression, offering no translation, expecting no reaction. Amara's Korean was good enough by the 3rd month to understand most of it. She understood enough to know that she was being discussed, not consulted, that she was the subject of a conversation she was not permitted to enter, that the woman who had just smiled at her across the table had, in the same breath, referred to Amara's presence in the house as an inconvenience that Tae-jun would eventually outgrow. Amara set down her chopsticks that evening with extraordinary care. She excused herself from the table. She walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door behind her, sat on the edge of the bed she shared with her husband, and stayed very still for a long time. She didn't cry right then. The crying came later in shorter, quieter bursts, in bathrooms, in the garden when no one was watching, in the car on the rare occasion she drove herself somewhere alone and could exist without performing composure for an audience that was always, always watching. What she felt in that bedroom was something beneath crying, something harder and older and more patient. She thought about calling her mother in Atlanta, her mother, who had looked at her with knowing, worried eyes when Amara told her she was moving into her husband's family home in Seoul. Her mother, who had said, very carefully, very lovingly, "Baby, you know I support you. I just want to know you'll be okay." Amara had said she would be fine. She had believed it when she said it. Now she sat on the edge of her bed in Seoul and thought about what fine actually meant. She had not been excluded from a meal. She had not been called a name. Nothing had happened that she could lift out of context and show someone as evidence of the things she was experiencing. And that, she was beginning to understand, was precisely the architecture of what they were doing to her. It was designed to leave no fingerprints, designed so that if she ever said anything to Tae-jun, his mother, his sister, his uncle, she would sound like a woman who had misunderstood, misread, miscalculated the ordinary friction of a family still adjusting. She could already hear how it would sound. She could already see the furrow between Tae-jun's brows. Not the furrow of anger, but the furrow of a man trying to reconcile two truths that should not coexist. So she said nothing. For months, she said nothing. She went back downstairs the next morning and ate breakfast with a family that looked, to anyone watching, perfectly civil. She smiled when they smiled, thanked the staff, drank her coffee, responded to the things said to her, and left space where there might have been more to say. And somewhere beneath all of that, very quietly, she started counting. Not the insults. Those she knew she might never be able to prove. She started counting the moments when she recognized the pattern beneath them. The deliberate seat chosen at the far end of the table. The conversation that included everyone except her. The invitation to an extended family gathering that appeared to have simply slipped through the cracks. Except she was the only person in the house who didn't know about it until it had already happened. She counted, and she waited. Tae-jun came home to a wife who had learned how to look fine when she wasn't. He brought her gifts from business trips. He came home ready to be the husband she needed. He noticed, the way perceptive people do, that something had shifted in her. Some quality of ease, of fullness, that had been present in the early months and now seemed to require more effort. But when he asked her how she was, she said fine. And because he wanted to believe it, and because she delivered it without obvious seams, he believed it. This is not to say he was a careless husband. He wasn't. But Tae-jun was a man who had built his entire life around reading situations correctly, around trusting his own eyes, his own judgment, the evidence directly in front of him. And every time he was in that house, the evidence in front of him was a family that appeared to be functioning. His mother asked about Amara's day. His sister borrowed a scarf from her. His uncle complimented her cooking at dinner. It looked, from where Tae-jun stood, like a family adjusting. It looked like normal. It was not normal. It was performance. Sustained, detailed, coordinated performance, executed so consistently that Amara sometimes wondered if they had discussed it, agreed on it somewhere she couldn't see. They were never cruel in front of Tae-jun, not once, not even slightly. And this meant that every time Amara felt the weight of it pressed down on her, every time she absorbed another small, deliberate humiliation, she carried it alone. Because bringing it to Tae-jun felt like walking into a courtroom without a single piece of evidence. The worst part was not the family. The worst part, the part that caught in her chest on the quiet nights when Tae-jun's breathing told her he was asleep, was the question she couldn't stop asking herself. What did I do wrong? She went back through it systematically, the way her mind worked when something refused to resolve. Was it the culture? Had she stepped over something she didn't understand? Had she been too forward, too present, too visible in a way that felt like a challenge to a family with established hierarchies she'd entered too fast? Had she failed to grieve the adjustment period they were owed, demanding belonging before she'd earned it? She reviewed every interaction she could remember with the precision of someone looking for the place where it went wrong. She found nothing. Every gesture she had made toward this family had been genuine. Every effort had been real. She had not been perfect. She was never going to claim that she had. But she had been trying in every honest sense of the word. The problem was not what she had done. The problem was what she was. She understood this on a Wednesday afternoon, standing in the kitchen while Mi-suk spoke on the phone 10 feet away. Mi-suk didn't lower her voice. She either assumed Amara couldn't understand or didn't care. She was speaking to someone, a relative, it sounded like, and she said, in the flat, certain tone of a woman stating a simple fact, "She is not what I would have chosen for him. She could never be. Not she is difficult. Not she made a mistake. She is not what I would have chosen. could never be. Amara stood in that kitchen with the weight of that sentence settling into her bones like something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for her to hear it out loud. She didn't make a scene. She finished what she was doing. She left the kitchen. But something changed in her that afternoon. Something that had been holding on, holding out, still reaching, finally went still. She would tell Tae-jun. Not today. Not while she was still raw with it. But she would tell him. Because she was his wife, and he was the only person in Seoul who could do anything at all about what was happening inside his own house. And she needed to know whether the man she had chosen, who had chosen her back, would believe her when she told him the truth about the people he loved most. She was not entirely sure he would. That uncertainty was its own kind of pain, separate from everything his family had done, sharper in some ways, because it came from a place where she had never expected to find something to be afraid of. She tucked it away. She waited for the right evening. She waited for the moment she could look at her husband and say, Tae-jun, I need you to hear me. Not the version of me that's been protecting you from this. Me. Right now. I need you to hear what's been happening in your house. She practiced it, alone, the way you practice things that matter. She had no idea that by the time she finally said it, by the time she sat across from her husband and opened her mouth and let the truth come out, the real test would not be whether she could find the right words. The real test would be whether he would choose to believe them. The evening Amara finally decided to tell him, she chose a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday meant anything, but because it was the first night in 3 weeks that Tae-jun came home before 9, before exhaustion had already pulled him somewhere unreachable, before the particular quiet of a man too tired to receive anything else settled over him like a second skin. He walked through the door at 7:30, loosening his tie with one hand, and when he found her sitting in the small reading room off the main hallway, not in the living area where she usually waited, not in the kitchen, but in the reading room with a book open in her lap that she hadn't turned a page of in 40 minutes, something in his expression shifted. Not alarm, just attention. The specific attention of a man who knows the woman he loves well enough to recognize when a room feels different because of how she's sitting in it. You eating? He asked. I was waiting for you. He looked at her for another moment, then went to change out of his suit. She heard him moving through the bedroom above her. The familiar sequence of sounds, shoes set aside, the low slide of a closet door, water running briefly. She stayed where she was. She had learned early in their marriage that rushing Tae-jun toward a conversation never produced the conversation she actually needed. He came to things. He always came. But you had to let him arrive on his own timeline, or the walls went up and stayed up for hours. He came downstairs in dark sweatpants and a faded gray shirt, the kind of outfit that always made him look younger than he was. Less like the man whose name other men said carefully, and more like the person she had met at a dinner party 8 years ago, who looked at her from across a room like she was a problem he desperately wanted to solve. He sat across from her, not next to her. Across, which meant he wanted to see her face. That was Tae-jun's way of saying he was paying attention before she'd said a word. Talk, he said. Not unkind, just direct. That was him. Amara closed the book. She set it on the side table. She looked at her husband. This man she had chosen, this man who had chosen her back in front of witnesses and meant every word of it. And she felt the practiced speech she'd been rehearsing dissolve the second she opened her mouth. Your family is different when you're not here, she said. He didn't move. Different how? Different like... She stopped, started again. When you walk out of this house, Tae-jun, the air changes. I can feel it. The way they look at me changes. The way they talk to me changes. The things they say. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. Things get said to me that would never get said if you were in the room. He was quiet for a moment. Not the defensive quiet. Not yet. The processing quiet. The quiet of a man running what he's just heard against what he already believes and looking for where the two overlap. What kind of things? He said. Your mother told me I would never be one of them. Not in a heated moment, not during an argument, just said it, over dinner, like she was commenting on the weather. Amara's voice stayed level. She had made a decision to keep it level because she knew that if she cried, if her voice broke even once, the emotional register would shift, and Tae-jun would spend more energy managing her feelings than actually hearing what she was saying. Soo-jin leaves me out of things deliberately. Family dinners I don't know about until they're already over. Group conversations I'm not added to. I've sat in this house alone on evenings when your entire family was gathered 3 rooms away and nobody thought to come tell me. Tae-jun's jaw moved, just slightly. And Dae-sung talks to me like I don't understand what's happening around me. He answers questions people direct at me. He finishes my sentences in a direction I wasn't going. He speaks Korean in front of me about me and doesn't lower his voice because she stopped herself again. Because I don't think it occurs to him that I might understand. The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, a car passed on the street beyond the gates. The estate absorbed the sound the way it absorbed everything, completely, leaving no trace. Tae-jun leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His eyes hadn't left her face. Amara, I know how it sounds. I'm not saying it sounds like anything. You have a look on your face right now, she said, very carefully, that I recognize. He didn't deny it, but he didn't confirm it either, which told her everything she needed to know about where this conversation was already going. My mother asks about you, he said. Every time I call from a trip, she asks how you're settling in. Soo-jin borrowed your green scarf last month and wore it to dinner like it was. Tae-jun, I'm not dismissing what you're saying. You're explaining it away. There's a difference. He exhaled through his nose, stood up, walked to the window. Not because there was anything to see out of it, but because Tae-jun in a difficult conversation always needed to be moving slightly, needed somewhere for the energy to go that wasn't directly at the person in front of him. What do you want me to do? He said. It wasn't quite a question. I want you to believe me. I do believe you think this is... Stop! Her voice was still level, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something with weight and edges. Don't finish that sentence the way you were about to finish it. I'm not asking you to believe my interpretation of something ambiguous. I'm telling you what people say to me, to my face, in this house, when you aren't here. I'm telling you that the family you think you have is performing something for you that doesn't exist the second you leave the room. That's not a misunderstanding, Tae-jun. That's not a cultural gap or adjustment friction or whatever phrase we've been using to make this feel manageable. That's deliberate. He turned back from the window. He looked at her for a long time, longer than felt comfortable, longer than she could read clearly. I don't think they hate you, he said finally. 4 words, 6 syllables. And the entire architecture of what she had just tried to build, all the careful control, all the level-voiced precision, simply cracked along its center. She heard herself exhale, heard it in a way she wasn't expecting to, like the air had been sitting in her chest since Tuesday and had only just found its way out. Okay, she said. Amara. No. She shook her head. Once. I heard you. Okay. I'm not saying I don't take this seriously. I know what you're saying. She stood up. Her hands were steady. She was slightly amazed, distantly, that her hands were steady. You're saying that you looked at the evidence in front of you, the evidence you have access to, which is not the same evidence I'm living in, and you made a judgment. I understand. I do. I've known these people my whole life. I know. My mother, whatever she said, she's not a cruel person. She's traditional, stubborn. She had a specific Tae-jun. Amara looked at him directly. I hope you're right. I genuinely do. And she left the room. She walked upstairs, went to the bathroom, not the bedroom, closed the door and stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Not crying, just looking. Trying to locate, in the face looking back at her, the woman who had thought that love, solid, real, tested love, was going to be sufficient protection against this particular kind of loneliness. She found her. She was still there, but she looked tired in a way that sleep wasn't going to fix. Downstairs she heard nothing. Tae-jun wasn't a man who paced or slammed things. His version of wrestling with something was silent, so complete it felt structural. She knew he was down there, turning it over, doing what Tae-jun did when something refused to sit right, examining it from every angle, looking for the explanation that made the most logical sense, the one that cost him the least. She knew, too, what that explanation would be. Cultural differences. Adjustment period. A mother who was protective of her son. A sister who was thoughtless rather than cruel. An uncle who was condescending to everyone, not specifically to her. It would all make sense if you assembled it a certain way. And Tae-jun was a man who had built an empire on assembling things the way that made the most sense. She dried her hands, went to bed. When he came upstairs an hour later, he was gentle with her. Careful. He lay beside her in the dark and put his arm around her, and she didn't pull away, and he didn't push for anything more than that. It was almost worse than a fight would have been, because it told her that he did love her, completely. It told her that the discomfort of not quite believing her was sitting in him too, heavy and unresolved. He wasn't indifferent to her pain. He just couldn't bring himself to let it be true. And Amara lay in the dark with her husband's arm around her and made a decision, not in a dramatic way, not with any particular finality, just the quiet click of a door closing somewhere internal. She was done telling him. Not done with him. Never that. But done bringing her evidence to a court that had already decided what it was prepared to believe. Tae-jun would have to find his own truth. She couldn't hand it to him, and she was finished trying. From the next morning, she stopped. Stopped mentioning the small exclusions. Stopped describing the conversations. Stopped arriving at breakfast with the particular expression that told him something had happened again. She smiled at Mi-suk across the breakfast table. She asked Soo-jin about her weekend plans with what appeared to be genuine interest. She thanked Dae-sung when he passed her the tea and did not react when he redirected the subsequent conversation as though she had not been the one who opened it. She became, in the house's common spaces, something very close to invisible. Not in the broken way, in the strategic way. She had spent her whole life being underestimated by people who mistook composure for passivity, and she understood, with bone-deep clarity, that the only thing more dangerous than a woman in pain was a woman in pain who stopped showing it. Tae-jun noticed the silence and read it the wrong way entirely. He thought it meant things had gotten better. He thought the conversation had cleared something, that she had said what she needed to say, and he had listened, and the act of that, the having of the conversation, had been enough. He went back to his trips, his negotiations, his world of controlled violence and careful power, and he left behind a house where his wife moved through the rooms like smoke and his family took her silence as permission. They did. Mi-suk moved faster now, with less caution. The things that had once been subtle, the exclusions, the redirections, the small cold ceremonies of dismissal, lost whatever restraint had previously softened their edges. It was as if Amara's silence confirmed something they had suspected, that she would absorb whatever was given to her, that there was a ceiling to what she would report, and they had already pushed past it and found the ceiling held. Soo-jin stopped bothering to explain her absences at shared meals. She simply didn't invite Amara and didn't acknowledge the omission. Once, she had at least offered the paper-thin excuse, "I didn't think it was your thing," but even that small effort disappeared now. Amara simply wasn't considered. Her presence in the house seemed to occupy, in Soo-jin's mind, roughly the same category as the furniture. Functional, acknowledged when necessary, otherwise not a factor. Dae-sung became the most brazen. He had always been the one who talked the most, who filled rooms with his voice, his opinions, his carefully calibrated assessments of every situation. But now his conversations in Amara's presence became a kind of passive theater, a demonstration aimed at someone invisible in the room, proving something he'd already decided was true. He spoke about Tae-jun's future as though Amara's place in it were a temporary arrangement. He referenced family decisions, financial ones, social ones, decisions about the estate and its management, in terms that made clear the expectation that these decisions would always ultimately sit with blood, with family, with people who belonged. One afternoon, 3 weeks after Amara stopped telling Tae-jun anything, she was in the garden, the East Garden, the smaller one she had claimed for herself in the early months of her marriage because it caught the afternoon light and because no one else seemed particularly interested in it. She was reading. Actually reading this time, actually inside the pages, because the garden was the one place in the house where the silence was genuinely hers rather than something imposed on her. Dae-sung found her there. He didn't ask if he could sit. He sat across from her in one of the iron chairs, crossed his legs, and looked out at the garden for a moment like a man arriving at a conclusion he'd been working toward for some time. "There's an event," he said, "next month. Extended family, some business associates of Tae-jun's, important people, the kind of evening where impressions matter." Amara set her book down. She looked at him. I think it would be better, Dae-sung said, if you were otherwise engaged that evening. The garden was very quiet. A bird moved in the hedges to her left. Excuse me, she said. I'm not trying to be unkind. He had the tone of a man who had rehearsed this, who had found the exact arrangement of words that allowed him to say a cruel thing in a measured voice. These guests, they have specific expectations about the Kong family, about what they're coming to see. Your presence would create questions that don't need to be created, conversations that would distract from what the evening is meant to accomplish. Amara looked at him, took her time with it. You're telling me to stay out of my husband's house so his guests don't have to look at me. I'm suggesting you're telling me to disappear for an evening so that you and Mi-suk can show Tae-jun's associates the version of this family that doesn't include the woman he married. She said it without heat, completely flat. That's what you're saying. Dae-sung's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it tightened. I'm saying that some situations require a degree of don't. She picked up her book. Don't finish that sentence in this garden. He left. Eventually. After a silence that he filled with the particular kind of dignity available to men who know they've overreached and refuse to acknowledge it. Amara sat in the garden after he was gone and felt the rage move through her the way water moves through rock. Not destructively, not yet, but with the patience of something that knows it has time and that stone, eventually, gives. She thought about Tae-jun. She thought about where he was right now, somewhere across the city, in some room making decisions that restructured the lives of men who crossed him. A man who could dismantle a rival's operation with 3 phone calls and never once raise his voice. She thought about the specific and infuriating irony of being married to the most powerful man she knew and having absolutely no power in the house where he kept her safe. Safe. That word. She had never corrected him when he used it. You're safe here, he had said, the first time he brought her to the estate. Nothing gets through those gates that I don't let through. He had meant it as a gift. She understood now what he'd failed to see, that the threat he'd spent his life learning to recognize wore dark clothing and came over walls. Not this one. This one wore family and sat at the same table and called her daughter-in-law. She did not tell Tae-jun about the garden conversation. She had already decided she was done telling him things. And there was a darker reason now, a reason she turned over in her mind with the careful precision of someone examining a wound. She was beginning to wonder, quietly and with increasing clarity, whether Tae-jun's refusal to believe her was innocent. She didn't want to think it. She resisted it. She knew him. She knew the quality of his love, its grain and weight, the particular way he carried it. She did not believe he wanted her to suffer. But there was a specific kind of willingness to not see something, and that willingness was different from blindness. Blindness was something that happened to you. Willingness was something you chose, even if you chose it without fully acknowledging that you were choosing. Tae-jun chose, she realized, to believe the version of his family that required less of him. And that truth, settling in quietly over the weeks, changed something in the texture of their marriage. Not the love. The love was still there. She felt it when he called her from a car between meetings just to ask what she was thinking. She felt it in the way he found her no matter what room she was in when he first got home. The love was not in question, but trust was different from love. Trust was the structure that love lived in, and the structure had developed a crack she could fit 2 fingers into. She stopped sleeping as deeply. Tae-jun noticed. He asked about it twice, gently, and she said she was adjusting to the seasonal change in the light, and he accepted it because he wanted to accept it, because the alternative was another conversation about his family that he didn't know how to navigate without disappointing someone. A month passed. The event Dae-sung had mentioned approached. 3 days before it, Mi-suk came to Amara's reading room in the early afternoon. Knocked once, which was unusual. Usually she simply appeared in doorways as though doors were suggestions that applied to other people. She sat down across from Amara without being asked, arranged herself in the chair with the specific posture of a woman preparing to be reasonable. The dinner on Friday, Mi-suk began. Yes, Amara said. Tae-jun will be expecting a certain atmosphere. He usually is. Mi-suk's eyes moved over her with the particular quality of assessment that never quite became a look of recognition, as though Amara were a piece of furniture that had been placed incorrectly and she was calculating the effort required to move it. It might be easier, Mi-suk said, if you joined us later, After the introductions, once the guests have settled. Amara looked at her mother-in-law. This woman who had smiled at her wedding, who called her daughter, the Korean word, myeoneri, in front of Tae-jun and somehow made even that sound like a category rather than a name. Does Tae-jun know you're having this conversation with me? Tae-jun is very busy. That's not what I asked. Mi-suk's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm trying to make this easier for everyone. No, Amara said. You're trying to make me absent from my own husband's home so that the people he's invited to it don't have to see me. Which is what Dae-sung asked me last month, and what I told him then is what I'm telling you now. She stood up. I will be at dinner on Friday, Mi-suk. I will be there when the guests arrive. I will be seated next to my husband, where I belong. And if that creates questions, she reached for her book, then those are questions that you and Dae-sung and whoever else in this family has been performing a different marriage than the one I'm living in. Those are questions that your performance created, not my presence. Mi-suk said nothing for a moment. Then, you make things very difficult. I'm sure it feels that way. Tae-jun will understand eventually that I need you to leave this room, Amara said. The words were quiet, completely without aggression. But there was something in the delivery, something final and load-bearing, that Mi-suk heard clearly, because she stood and she left, and she closed the door behind her with more care than she usually showed for anything in Amara's vicinity. Amara stood in the middle of the reading room alone. Her hands were not shaking. She checked. They weren't. She was somewhat surprised. She sat back down and stared at the page she'd been on without reading any of it, and thought about Friday's dinner with a clarity that felt dangerously close to calm. She would go. She would sit where she belonged. And if it created complications in the architecture of performance this family had built, good. Let it complicate. But beneath the clarity, beneath the anger that had refined itself over months into something nearly surgical, there was something else. A fear she had been keeping at a low simmer below the threshold of what she let herself acknowledge directly. The fear was this, that she could survive what the family was doing to her. She had already survived most of it. She was still standing, still whole in the ways that mattered, still Amara Williams who had sat across from King Tae-jun at a dinner party and made him nervous because she was direct. What she wasn't sure she could survive was discovering that her husband, her actual husband, the man she had reorganized her entire life for, the man she had crossed an ocean for, would, at a final reckoning, choose the comfortable version of his reality over the true one. That fear lived in a place she couldn't quite look at directly. On Friday, she dressed carefully. She came down the stairs at the right time. She stood at the threshold of the dining room with her shoulders back and her face arranged in the composed expression she had perfected over 18 months of practice. Mi-suk saw her, and her expression went through three things in rapid succession: surprise, frustration, and then the efficient slide back into the performance, the smile reappearing like a mask picked up off a table. Dae-sung saw her, and his eyes went briefly to Mi-suk, and Mi-suk's eyes went briefly to Dae-sung, and in that half-second exchange of glances, Amara read the entire conversation they had already had about her without saying a word. They had planned for her absence. She had arrived anyway. The evening was tense in the way of evenings where tension has been agreed upon by most of the parties involved, and the remaining party simply hasn't received the memo. Amara was introduced to Tae-jun's business associates, and she was gracious and warm and met their handshakes with the precise degree of confidence that told them she was comfortable in this room, in this house, next to this man. She watched two of them recalibrate their expectations in real time, watched them arrive with one set of assumptions and update them within the first 5 minutes of conversation. Tae-jun watched her from across the room with an expression she could read from any distance: pride. Clean, uncomplicated pride. His family watched her with something else entirely. By the end of the evening, after the guests had gone and the house had settled back into its nighttime register, Amara sat at the dining room table while the staff cleared the last of it around her. She was alone in there for a few minutes, and she let herself be alone in it, let herself feel the weight of what the evening had cost her. Not the energy of performing composure, which she had long ago stopped counting, but the specific accumulating weight of continuing to exist in a space that had decided before she arrived that she did not belong in it. From the hallway outside the dining room, she heard Mi-suk's voice, low, certain, directed at Sujin or Dae-sung or both. She didn't stay away. She never does what we... It doesn't matter. Mi-suk's voice dropped further, but the house carried sound in strange ways, and Amara sat very still and let it carry. Tae-jun is going to Busan next week. 3 days, maybe 4. We have time. Amara set down the glass she had been holding. We have time. 3 words. She turned them over in her mind, feeling the shape of them, the particular threat in their casualness. They were not afraid of her. They had never been afraid of her, and they had just told her through a wall that the next time Tae-jun left the city, whatever had been building, whatever restraint the presence of Tae-jun's pride had imposed on the evening, was going to come off entirely. Amara set the glass down with both hands. She sat in the dining room of her husband's family estate and understood, with the kind of clarity that only arrives after a long time of not wanting to see something, that she had reached the end of what silence could protect her from. The next move, whatever it was, whoever made it, was going to change everything. Tae-jun left for Busan on a Monday morning. Amara stood at the top of the stairs and watched him go. Watched the way he moved through the front entrance, the way he always moved through it, with the particular economy of a man who never wastes a gesture, who has calculated the exact amount of energy required for every action and does not exceed it. He had kissed her before he left, properly. Both hands on her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw the way he did when he was about to be somewhere else, and wanted to leave something of himself behind. She had held on to his wrists for just a second longer than usual, and he had noticed. She saw him notice. But his car was waiting and his phone was already buzzing with the first of what would be 20 calls before he crossed the city limits. 3 days, he said. Maybe 4. I know, she said. He looked at her. That look she knew, the one where he was reading something in her face that he couldn't quite translate, where the information was almost there but not quite assembling into something he could act on. Call me if you need anything, he said. She almost laughed. Not unkindly, not at him, just at the specific shape of that sentence, call me if you need anything, and how little it mapped onto the reality of what happened in this house when he was in it versus when he wasn't. I will, she said. He left. She stood at the top of the stairs for a moment after the door closed, listening to the engine of his car fade past the gates, and then she went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Mi-suk's voice through the dining room wall. We have time. She had spent the days between that Friday dinner and this Monday morning trying to decide what she was going to do with those 3 words. She had turned over options the way you turn over river stones, examining each one, setting it aside, picking up the next. She could call Tae-jun. She could tell him what she'd overheard. But she already knew, with the specific weariness of someone who has run that scenario too many times, exactly how that conversation would go. She would describe what she heard. He would listen carefully. He would ask clarifying questions in the measured way. He asked clarifying questions when something didn't sit right, but he didn't want to commit to believing it yet. And then he would say something that was technically sympathetic and functionally dismissive, and she would be exactly where she had been after the last conversation and the one before that. No. If Tae-jun was going to understand what happened in this house when he wasn't here, he was going to have to see it himself. And since she couldn't manufacture that, since she had no control over when he came and went and what his family chose to do in his absence, all she could do was remain exactly where she was, as visible and present and impossible to erase as she had been on Friday evening, and wait for the thing that Mi-suk had promised was coming. She was not naive about what that meant. She went downstairs at 8:30 to find Mi-suk already at the breakfast table, drinking tea with the unhurried quality of a woman who owns the atmosphere she occupies. Sujin was on her phone. Dae-sung was not there. He kept his own hours, came and went with the looseness of a man who has never had to account for his schedule to anyone. Amara poured her coffee, sat down at her usual place. The table had a specific arrangement that had settled into ritual over her 18 months in the house. Mi-suk at the head, Sujin to her left, the empty chair to her right where Tae-jun sat when he was home, and which sat empty and slightly accusatory when he wasn't. Amara sat across from Sujin, which meant she faced the window, which meant she could see the garden when she looked up from her plate. She had always thought that placement was accidental. She no longer thought anything about this table was accidental. Sleep well? Mi-suk asked. The question was delivered with complete pleasantness. The the kind of pleasantness that exists in a register entirely separate from sincerity. Fine, Amara said. You? Always. Mi-suk set down her teacup. Tae-jun will call when he arrives in Busan. You don't need to wait up for it. I'll let you know he's safe. Amara looked at her. I have his number, she said. I'll hear from him directly. Something moved through Mi-suk's expression, too fast to catch cleanly, gone before it could be named. She picked up her teacup again. Of course, she said. The morning passed without incident, which Amara understood was its own kind of incident. The family was waiting for something, or building towards something, with the patience of people who have decided they don't need to hurry because the outcome is already settled in their minds. That afternoon, Tae-jun called. He had arrived safely. The meetings were moving faster than anticipated. There was a possibility, he said, that he'd be done by Wednesday evening instead of Thursday. He sounded distracted, which meant the meetings were going well, because Tae-jun only sounded distracted when he was genuinely absorbed in something, and he was only genuinely absorbed in things that were working. Wednesday might be earlier than I thought, he said. Come home when you're done, she told him. You okay? She chose the word carefully. Not fine. She had used fine too many times. She could hear it losing its weight even as she said it. I'm here, she said instead. A pause. Brief. I'll call tonight, he said. He did call that night, and the night after. On Tuesday morning, the shift happened. It was not dramatic. It was not announced. It arrived the way a change in weather arrives, through accumulated small signals that you register individually as nothing in particular and only understand as a pattern once it's fully upon you. At breakfast, Amara came downstairs to find the table set for 3. Her chair was still there, but the arrangement had changed, shifted so subtly that you might not notice it unless you had been sitting at this table for a year and a half and had memorized the specific geography of it, the way you memorize the geography of any space where you feel like an intruder. Her setting had been moved, not removed. Moved. 6 inches further from the center, her coffee cup placed at a slightly different angle. Small things. The kind of things that could be dismissed as the unthinking logistics of whoever had set the table that morning. Amara sat down, said nothing. The housekeeper, Mrs. Park, a quiet woman in her 60s who had been with the Kong family for over 2 decades, and whose loyalty, Amara had always understood, resided primarily with Mi-suk, had prepared things differently this morning. The dishes that had, in previous months, included the elements Amara preferred were arranged slightly differently today. Nothing was missing. Nothing was wrong. It was all just slightly, undeniably pointed. She ate. She drank her coffee. She watched. At 10:15, Dae-sung arrived. He came into the house with the particular energy of a man who has been told something privately that has lifted his mood in a way he is attempting not to display too obviously. He greeted Mi-suk warmly. He looked at Amara with a glance that lasted approximately 1 second, just long enough to acknowledge her presence and communicate that he considered the acknowledgement sufficient. Good morning, he said to the room, which included her technically and excluded her functionally. Morning, Amara said. He didn't respond to her specifically. By noon, a group had assembled in the main living area. Mi-suk, Soo-jin, Dae-sung, and 2 relatives Amara recognized from various family gatherings but had never been formally introduced to. They were having lunch together. She found this out not because anyone told her, but because she walked past the living room on her way to the kitchen and heard the sound of plates and conversation and laughter. The specific laughter of people who are relaxed, who feel that no one is watching who needs to be performed for. She stopped outside the doorway. She stood very still. The conversation was in Korean, moving at the rapid, comfortable pace of people who have been speaking to each other their whole lives. She understood most of it. She stood outside the doorway and she listened, and what she heard was not cruelty, not overt cruelty, nothing so simple, but absence. She did not exist in this conversation. The house they were describing, the family they were referencing, the future they were casually outlining in the easy shorthand of people who share a long history. None of it had a space for her. She was not in the room. She was not in the conversation. She was not in the future they were sketching. She went to the kitchen, made herself lunch, ate it standing at the counter because she had not been invited to sit, and she had decided months ago that she was done inviting herself. At 2 in the afternoon, she found out about the gift. This was how it happened. She was looking for a book she thought she had left in the small sitting room off the east corridor. A different room from her reading room, one that the family used more communally, or had before Amara's presence, had quietly rearranged the geography of which spaces felt available to her. She was looking for the book on the side table where she thought she'd left it, and instead she found a box. It was a gift box, wrapped, with a card attached. Her name was not on the card. She looked at the card without opening it. It was tucked into the envelope loosely enough that she could read the handwriting on the front, which was Tae-jun's, addressed to her mother. The box was approximately the size of the gift Tae-jun had asked Amara 3 months ago to pass along to Mi-suk. He had been traveling, had arranged for something to be delivered to the house, and had called Amara to ask her to make sure it reached his mother directly. To give it to her herself, he had said. He wanted her to know it came from both of them. Amara had taken the package to Mi-suk the same afternoon. Mi-suk had accepted it with 2 hands and a small nod and said she would open it when Tae-jun called. Looking at the box now, the wrapping paper, the card in Sujin's handwriting, the bow that was slightly crushed on one side as though it had been removed and replaced, Amara felt something cold move through her sternum. She looked at the box for a very long time. Then she took out her phone and scrolled back through 3 months of messages until she found the one from Tae-jun. Did my mother like it? The necklace. And her own reply. I'm sure she did. I gave it to her like you asked. And Tae-jun's response, she didn't mention it when I called. Probably just her being weird about jewelry. She'll come around. Amara set her phone down. She looked at the wrapped box with its slightly crushed bow. She thought about all the times Tae-jun had mentioned gifts that had seemed to disappear into silence. Small mentions in passing. I sent something ahead. Let me know when it arrives. That she had followed up on and found no trace of. She had assumed the logistics of a large household, the sometimes inefficient movement of packages through staff and rooms. She had not allowed herself to follow the possibility further than that, because following it further meant arriving at a conclusion she wasn't ready to hold. She was ready now. She picked up the box. Carefully. She carried it to her reading room, closed the door, and sat down with it in her lap. She opened the card. Her hands were extremely steady, and she was slightly frightened by how steady they were, because the steadiness did not come from calm. It came from something past calm, something that lives on the other side of a feeling once you've gone all the way through it. The card was from Sujin to Mi-suk. It said, she read it twice, found this going through the east sitting room. Think it's what Appa sent a few months ago. Might as well actually use it, don't you think? Amara read it twice. Then she set the card down and looked at the middle distance of her reading room. The shelf of books, the window that caught afternoon light, the chair where she spent most of her hours in this house that her husband believed was her home. She thought about the invitation to Tae-jun's cousin's engagement dinner, the one she had not attended, that Tae-jun had been told she preferred to skip due to a headache. She had never said that. She had never been asked. She had heard about the dinner from Tae-jun a full week after it happened, and when she told him she hadn't known about it, he had looked confused and said his mother had mentioned something about Amara not feeling well, and she had let it go because what else was there to do? What was there to say? It was already over. She thought about Tae-jun's associate, the man from Daegu, whose wife had attempted to reach Amara 3 times through a mutual contact. Amara had never received those messages. She had found out about them 6 weeks later, accidentally, when the woman mentioned in passing that she'd sent word through Mi-suk. Mi-suk, who had never mentioned receiving any such messages, who had, presumably, decided that this particular connection, a friendship for Amara, a social contact that might have given her something resembling a life outside these walls, was not something worth facilitating. The pieces were assembling now, and they were assembling fast. She set the box on the table beside her. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked at the east garden, her garden, the one she had claimed because no one else wanted it, and stood there with her arms crossed and felt the architecture of what had been done to her arrange itself into something with a shape, something she could finally see whole. This had not been a family making a difficult adjustment. This had not been cultural friction or the normal static of a marriage integrating into an existing household. This had been active, coordinated, sustained. They had intercepted her gifts and rerouted them. They had relayed false information to Tae-jun about her choices and preferences. They had isolated her from social connections that might have provided support or friendship, or simply the normalizing presence of someone who looked at her without calculation. They had built a false record, a version of Amara that Tae-jun was receiving, curated, and edited, that justified the slow erosion of his trust in what she told him, because the version of her they were delivering was a woman who opted out, who withdrew, who didn't attend and didn't engage and quietly receded. And then, when she told him the truth, when she finally sat across from him and described what she was living, he had heard it through the lens of that false record. He had measured it against a picture of her that they had constructed specifically to make her truth sound like complaint. She had not been dismissed because her husband didn't love her. She had been set up to be dismissed. Amara stood at the window for a very long time. Then she went to find Dae-sung. He was in the main sitting room, alone with his phone, the others having dispersed to various parts of the house during the afternoon. He looked up when she entered, and something in the look he gave her, something assessing, slightly cautious, told her that he registered the quality of her presence immediately, that whatever he saw on her face was different from what he was accustomed to seeing there. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm in the middle of... I'm not asking." He looked at her for a moment, then he set down his phone. She sat across from him, not the chair to his side, not the position of someone entering his space deferentially, but directly across, in the chair that put them at eye level, that made the geometry of the room a conversation between equals. "The package Tae-jun sent his mother 3 months ago," she said. "The necklace." His expression did not change. That was itself information. "I don't know what you do." She kept her voice entirely level. "I found it in the sitting room, still wrapped, with a note from Soo-jin that made it very clear this is not a surprise to anyone in this house, except possibly the person it was meant for." Dae-sung looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. She could see him doing it, could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the assessment of how much she knew and what could still be managed, and whether this was a situation that could be deflected with the right combination of tone and misdirection. "Gift timing is often the Daegu messages," she said. "Mrs. O, who tried to reach me 3 times through my souk. The engagement dinner I didn't attend because I had a headache I never said I had. The group chats I was never added to that Tae-jun was told I found overwhelming." She watched his face. "I need to know how long." "You're upset," Dae-sung said. "That's understandable, but you're drawing connections that... How long have you been editing what Tae-jun knows about what happens to me in this house?" Silence. Real silence now. Not the managed, performative silence of a man composing a response. The actual silence of someone who has been caught in the specific way you can only be caught when the other person has the right question and is asking it directly and is not going to be redirected. He picked up his phone, set it back down, looked past her briefly, toward the hallway, toward the sounds of the house around them. "You should speak to me, Sook," he said. "I'm speaking to you." "This is..." He stopped. Something moved through his expression. Not guilt, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something that looked like a man who made a choice some time ago and is only now beginning to calculate what it's going to cost him. "Family decisions are complicated. You came into a situation with existing... I came into a situation with existing people," she said, "who decided before I arrived what I was going to be allowed to be in it. And then they spent 18 months making sure I couldn't prove it." She stood up. "I'm going to find Sook." "Amara." His voice stopped her at the doorway. She turned. He was standing now too, and his face had shed several of its usual layers. The charm, the deliberate pleasantness, the performance of a man who is fundamentally reasonable. What was underneath was something older and less managed. "Think carefully about what you're about to do." She looked at him. "I've been thinking carefully for 18 months, she said. "I'm done with careful." She found Sook in the garden. Not Amara's garden, the main one, the large formal space at the front of the property that Sook treated as her personal territory. She was sitting in one of the stone benches near the magnolia tree, a cup of tea beside her, apparently reading something on a small tablet. The afternoon light was doing something pleasant with the leaves above her, and the whole scene had the quality of a painting, of something composed and deliberate. Sook looked up when she heard Amara's footsteps on the path. Her expression moved through surprise and then settled, very quickly, into something Amara had never seen on her face before. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like the specific resignation of a person who has been expecting a confrontation for some time and has decided upon its arrival that they are not going to pretend they weren't. "Sit down," Misuk said. "I'll stand." Misuk set her tablet aside. "You found the package," she said. Not a question. Amara stared at her. "You're not even going to—" She stopped, recalibrated. "You knew I'd find it." Eventually, Misuk looked at the garden in front of her. Not at Amara, but past her, at the space between the hedges where the afternoon moved through. "I assumed eventually." "And you didn't move it." "It doesn't change anything." Amara felt the ground beneath her do something that was not physical. A shifting, a reorientation, the way the world rearranges itself when you realize the conversation you thought you were about to have is not the actual conversation that is happening. "It doesn't change." She heard herself repeat the words, heard how they sounded in the garden air. "There is a necklace in that house that my husband chose for his mother, that he asked me, specifically me, to give to her, that she never received, and you're telling me it doesn't change anything?" "I'm telling you," Misuk said, with the specific patience of a woman who has made her peace with something and is no longer interested in defending it, "that it doesn't change what is true." "What is true?" "Yes." Amara looked at her. This woman who had called her Myonuri at a wedding, who had smiled at the photographs, who had, she understood now, looking at Misuk's face in the garden light, with all the performance stripped away by the simple fact that there was no longer any reason to maintain it, who had decided, before Amara ever walked through those gates, that she was an intrusion, a mistake, something to be managed until Tae-jun came to his senses. "I never did anything to you," Amara said. "No," Misuk said, "you didn't." The admission was so clean it took the air out of the moment entirely. "Then why—" "Because you are not what I would have chosen for him." Misuk finally looked at her directly. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. She was not cruel in the way of someone enjoying cruelty. She was something more difficult to argue with than that. She was certain, completely, immovably, structurally certain. "That is not about what you did or didn't do, Amara. It never was. You are not wrong to be angry about that. I understand why you're angry, but the truth does not require my apology to remain true." The garden was very still. A bird called somewhere in the hedges, then stopped. "Tae-jun will never choose you over his blood," Misuk said. Not with malice, with the flat conviction of someone stating a law of nature. "You can tell him everything you found today. You can show him the box. You can explain every moment of everything that happened in this house since you arrived. And he will love you, and he will be angry, and—" She paused. "He will choose what he chooses, and it will not be you." Amara stood in the garden and felt something happen in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. It was not defeat. It was not grief. It was the specific, crystallizing sensation of a decision arriving, not a decision she was making consciously, not one she was deliberating over, but one that had apparently been made in some deep and wordless part of her over the course of 18 months and had simply, in this moment, arrived at the surface. She looked at Misuk for a long time. "You don't know him," she said quietly. "You think you do. You think because he came out of you and you've watched him his whole life, that you understand who he is when it matters. But you don't. You've never seen him when the things he loves are in genuine danger. You've managed him, performed for him, made sure he only ever saw the version of this family that you control." She felt her voice stay level in a way that surprised her. "He's coming home Wednesday." Misuk's expression shifted. Something, not quite alarm, but the early edge of it. "He said Thursday." "He said Wednesday might be earlier than he thought." Amara held Misuk's gaze. "And when he comes home, I'm going to tell him everything. Not the version I've been protecting him from. Not the careful, edited, what can I actually prove version. Everything. The package, the messages, the dinner, all of it." Misuk was quiet for a moment. "You'll fracture this family," she said. "You fractured it," Amara said. "I'm just done pretending I don't see the crack." She turned and walked back toward the house. Her hands were not shaking. She was almost to the door when she heard Misuk's voice behind her. Not loud, not urgent, just carrying on the afternoon air with the particular quality of a woman who has decided that composure is the last weapon available to her. "He won't believe you," Misuk said. "He never has." Amara did not turn around. She pushed open the door and walked into the house that had been a performance set for 18 months and thought about Tae-jun's voice on the phone. Wednesday might be earlier than I thought, and understood that she was done waiting for a moment that felt right, done waiting for conditions that would never arrive, done constructing arguments that would be heard through a filter his family had spent a year and a half building. She went to his bedroom. She picked up her phone. She was about to call him, about to say, come home now. There are things you need to know, and I need you to hear them from me before someone else manages what you're allowed to understand. When her phone buzzed in her hand, a message from Tae-jun. Meetings wrapped early. Heading back tonight. Don't wait up. She read it twice. She set the phone on the bed. She sat down beside it and looked at the bedroom door and thought about Mi-suk in the garden and Dae-sung's face in the sitting room and the box with its slightly crushed bow and 18 months of accumulated, deliberate, coordinated erasure, and understood that she had just run out of time to decide what kind of woman she was going to be when her husband walked through that door. He was already on his way home. And somewhere below her, in the rooms of this house, his family was doing the same arithmetic. Amara sat on the edge of the bed for 4 minutes. She counted them. Not deliberately. She wasn't watching the clock with any intention, but her mind had defaulted to counting the way it always did when the emotional register of a situation exceeded what language could hold. 4 minutes of sitting with Tae-jun's message on the screen in front of her, with the particular quality of stillness that arrives not from calm, but from the temporary suspension of every available response, while the body tries to decide which one is going to be necessary. Heading back tonight. Don't wait up. She stood up. She went to the bathroom, turned on the cold water and put both hands under it, held them there. The cold moved up her wrists and she stayed with it, watching the water run over her knuckles, and she thought with the specific clarity of someone who has finally stopped arguing with what's true. He is coming home tonight, his family knows it, and the next few hours are going to determine the rest of everything. She dried her hands. She went back to the bedroom doorway and stood there listening to the house. It was 7:15 in the evening. The staff had finished the dinner service and mostly retreated. She could hear, from somewhere toward the main sitting room, the low register of a television, which meant Soo-jin was in there. From the direction of the study on the ground floor, the specific kind of silence that meant someone was in it and not wanting that known, which was Dae-sung, almost certainly, because Dae-sung was the kind of man who thought that staying very still made him invisible. Mi-suk would be in her rooms. She would have gone there after the garden, after Amara walked away, and she would be sitting with whatever version of this evening she was preparing to manage. Amara went downstairs. She didn't go to the sitting room. She went to the kitchen, made tea she didn't particularly want, and stood at the counter with it while she thought about exactly what she was going to say to Tae-jun when he walked through the door. Not the version she had rehearsed in the weeks before. That version was built for a different conversation, a planned one, a prepared one, where she would sit him down and present things in order and give him time to absorb each piece before moving to the next. This was not going to be that conversation. He was coming home tonight, possibly within hours, and whatever she said to him was going to have to be said in the immediate aftermath of his family, realizing that he was here, that the timeline they had been counting on had compressed, that the 4 days they had planned to use had become a single evening. She needed to get to him first. That was the whole thing. It was very simple, actually. When stripped of everything else, she needed to be the first voice he heard, the first account he received, the first framing he encountered. Because if Mi-suk got to him first, if Dae-sung managed to get 5 minutes with him before Amara did, then whatever Amara said after that would arrive already shaped by whatever they had told him, already filtered through the narrative they would construct in the window between his car pulling through the gates and his feet on the stairs. She heard the sound of a door from the direction of the study. Footsteps in the corridor, deliberate, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who has decided to move through space as though he owns it and doesn't need to explain himself to the furniture. Dae-sung appeared in the kitchen doorway, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who expected to find the kitchen empty and has found it occupied and is deciding in real time how to adjust. "You're still up," he said. "I am." He moved to the counter on the other side of the kitchen, opened a cabinet, retrieved a glass with the careful deliberateness of someone performing normality for an audience while their mind is working on something else entirely. "Tae-jun called," he said, casually, as though it were nothing. "He said he's on his way back." Amara looked at him. I know, she said. He filled the glass with water, turned, looked at her across the kitchen with something that had almost entirely shed the pretense of pleasantness. Not hostile, not threatening, just bare. The face of a man who has calculated the risk of continuing to perform and decided the calculation no longer favors it. You should think about what you want to happen tonight, he said. I've been thinking about it. I mean, really think. He set the glass down on the counter. You're angry. You have reasons to be angry. I'm not going to sit here and tell you those reasons are invented. But anger makes a mess of things that are already complicated. And what happens in the next few hours in this house is going to determine. Don't, she said. He stopped. Don't manage me, she said. Don't sit here and use the reasonable voice and talk about what I should think about as though you're concerned about outcomes, rather than about what happens to you when Tae-jun finds out what you've done. We're past that, Dae-sung. You know we're past it. I know we're past it. So let's just be honest about what's actually happening in this room. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Something that might, in a different man, have looked like respect, but in Dae-sung looked more like the recalibration of someone encountering a different degree of resistance than anticipated. All right, he said. You're worried, she said, and you should be. She picked up her tea and walked out of the kitchen. She went to the main entrance hallway and sat in one of the chairs positioned near the front door. Not the formal sitting chairs, but the smaller practical ones near the side table where keys were left and packages were received. The ones that had always felt slightly provisional, as though their purpose was to hold people who were arriving or leaving, rather than people who actually lived there. She sat in one of them now, and she waited. 40 minutes passed. She heard the household stir before she heard his car, heard Soo-jin's television click off, heard footsteps from the direction of Mi-suk's rooms, heard the particular quality of the house rearranging itself the way it always did when Tae-jun was about to arrive, every person in it unconsciously orienting toward the center of gravity. Then headlights swept across the front windows, the engine, the gate. She stood up. The front door opened and Tae-jun walked in, and the first thing he did, the absolute first thing, before he set down his bag, before he loosened his jacket, before he did any of the arriving things he always did, was find her face. Across the entrance hallway, in the low light, he found her face and looked at it the way he always looked at it when he came home, with that specific quality of landing, of something that had been slightly unmoored becoming located again. Hey, he said. Hey. He came toward her, reached for her. She let him hold her for a moment, let herself be held, because she needed it, and because pretending she didn't would have been its own kind of dishonesty. And then she pulled back slightly and looked at him. I need to talk to you, she said. Right now, before anything else, before you go anywhere or talk to anyone. He read her face. She watched him do it. Okay, he said. Not here. She glanced at the hallway behind him, the directions the house extended from this point, all the rooms and their listening walls. Outside. They went to the east garden, her garden. She had chosen it deliberately because it was the one space in this house that felt, in whatever limited and imprecise way any space here could feel, like hers. Tae-jun sat on the iron bench. She stood. She had tried sitting, but sitting felt wrong. She needed to be on her feet for this, needed the physicality of standing her own ground while she said what she was about to say. She told him everything, not the way she had planned to tell him. Not ordered and measured and carefully assembled for an audience she was worried about losing. She told it the way it had actually happened, messily, in the sequence her memory produced it rather than the sequence that would have made the most logical argument, because the logical argument had always been the thing they used to disqualify her, and she was done organizing her truth for the comfort of the people who had made her live it. She told him about the conversations through walls, the deliberate exclusions, the way the table was set when he wasn't home. She told him about Dae-sung in the garden, telling her to absent herself from her own husband's dinner. She told him about Mi-suk at the breakfast table. It might be easier if you joined us later, and what that sentence actually meant when you took the pleasant tone off it. She told him about the package. She watched his face when she said it, watched the particular stillness that came over him. Not the listening stillness, not the processing stillness, but something harder and less familiar, something she did not have a name for because she had not seen it directed at his family before, only at people who were outside it. She told him about the messages from the woman in Daegu, The engagement dinner she hadn't attended because she had a headache she never said she had. The group chats, the invitations intercepted, the adjustments made to the story. Tae-jun was receiving about who his wife was and what she chose and what she wanted and what she didn't show up for. She told him that the version of their marriage he had been living in was not the marriage she had been living in. She told him that they had not merely been unkind to her, they had lied to him. The garden was very quiet when she finished. Tae-jun sat on the iron bench with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and his eyes somewhere on the ground in front of him. She could see the muscle in his jaw working, could see the particular quality of his breathing, steady, controlled, the kind of controlled that requires active maintenance. "The box," he said. "You still have it." "In my reading room." He nodded once, very slowly. "The card," he said. "Soo-jin's handwriting." "Yes." Another silence. "When you told me," he said, "months ago, when you sat across from me and told me they were different when I was gone." He looked up. He looked at her directly. The expression on his face was something she had never seen before. Not grief exactly, not anger exactly, but the specific look of a man confronting the precise shape of his own failure. "I told you I didn't think they hated you." "Yes," she said. "I was wrong." 3 words. Simple. She had expected. She didn't know what she had expected. Some continuation of the old patterns. Some version of the reasonable resistance. Not this. Not so fast. Not so clean. Not with so little defense of what he had chosen to believe for the past 6 months. She felt something move through her chest that she didn't immediately trust. Something that wanted to be relief, and she didn't trust it yet. Not fully. Not until she saw what he did next. Tae-jun stood up. He was very tall when he stood, and the particular quality of how he stood, the arrangement of his body in space, the posture that was not aggressive but contained something that made the space around it feel different, was something she recognized from the few times she had seen him in his professional context, in the rooms where he was who he was to the people who worked for him. "Stay here," he said. "Tae-jun, please." Not a command. Something rawer than that. "Give me 5 minutes." She watched him walk back toward the house. She sat down on the bench, pressed her palms flat on the cold iron of it, and looked at the garden and breathed. Inside the house, she heard nothing for the first 2 minutes. Then she heard a door. Then voices, not distinct enough through the walls and distance to make out words, but distinct enough in register and quality to understand what she was hearing. Tae-jun's voice, low, controlled, the vocal equivalent of a closed fist. And Mi-suk's, initially at the same register and then rising slightly, not in volume, but in pitch, the particular sound of composure under sudden strain. Then Dae-sung's voice entering from somewhere. Then Soo-jin, briefer, higher, the sound of someone caught unprepared. Amara sat in the garden and listened to the muffled sounds of a family encountering a version of Kong Tae-jun they had not adequately accounted for. She was still sitting there when Tae-jun appeared in the garden doorway. He was different, not physically. Same face, same posture, same dark jacket. But something in the register of him had settled into something colder and more final than what had walked through the front door an hour ago. She had seen this before, rarely and from an angle, but she recognized it. The specific quality Tae-jun carried when a decision had been made that he was not going to reconsider. "Come inside, Ma," he said. She came inside. They went to the dining room, the main one, the formal one, the room that had been the geography of so many of the things that had happened to her in this house. The table was empty, the overhead light was on, which gave the room a different quality than it usually had in the evenings, more exposed, less atmospheric, more like an accounting than a gathering. Mi-suk was there, Soo-jin, Dae-sung. They were arranged around the room in positions that telegraphed their various states. Mi-suk standing near the window with her hands clasped in front of her, chin slightly elevated, the posture of a woman who has decided that dignity is the only available position. Soo-jin near the far wall, her arms crossed, her expression the complicated one of someone who has been caught and is not sure whether the appropriate response is contrition or defiance and hasn't landed on either. Dae-sung near the doorway. Notable, Amara registered, that he had positioned himself near an exit. Tae-jun stepped into the room. Amara came in behind him and stood to his left, slightly back, and no one acknowledged her presence with anything except a brief, weighted look before returning to Tae-jun, which was its own kind of answer. She had never mattered enough in this room for her presence to require a response beyond accounting for it. "The necklace," Tae-jun said. No preamble. "The one I asked Amara to deliver to you 3 months ago." Mi-suk looked at him. "I received it," she said. "You received it." Tae-jun's voice was entirely flat. "And then what happened to it?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm everything. "I set it aside," Mi-suk said. "I intended to—" "It's still wrapped," Tae-jun said, "in the sitting room, with a note from Soo-jin discussing what to do with it, dated 6 weeks after I sent it." Soo-jin's jaw tightened. "I didn't—" she started. "Don't." Tae-jun's voice hadn't risen. It didn't need to. The flatness of it was its own escalation. The sound of a man who has run out of the version of himself that manages his responses for the comfort of the people in the room. "I'm not asking for a sequence of events. I need to know why. That's what I need." The room held a very specific silence. The silence of people who have been performing one thing for a long time and have just been placed in a room where the performance no longer has any audience that would be fooled by it. Dae-sung cleared his throat. "Tae-jun," he said, and his voice had the careful quality of a man who has assessed the situation and concluded that the only play remaining is the one that sounds most reasonable. "You've had a long trip. This is a conversation that deserves more space than—" "The woman in Daegu," Tae-jun said, still not looking at Dae-sung, still looking at his mother. "Mrs. O, who tried to contact Amara 3 times through you." He paused. "Did those messages reach Amara?" Mi-suk said nothing. "Did they?" he said. "They were not—" Mi-suk stopped, reconsidered. Something moved across her face. The specific expression of a woman who has lived long enough and is proud enough to understand that the version of this she wants to give is not the version that is going to hold in this room tonight. Her chin came down slightly. "No," she said. "They didn't reach her." The word landed in the room like something structural giving way. Soo-jin looked away, toward the window. Anywhere. Tae-jun was very still. "The engagement dinner," he said, "in March, when I was told Amara had a headache and preferred to stay home." Mi-suk looked at him. "She wasn't ready for—" "Did she tell you she had a headache?" A silence so complete it had mass. "No," Mi-suk said. Tae-jun turned his head then, slow, deliberate, and looked at Dae-sung. Dae-sung was a man who had navigated Kang Tae-jun's world for over 2 decades. He had sat across from difficult men in difficult rooms. He did not easily show discomfort, but what was on his face right now was something that his practiced composure couldn't fully contain, the expression of a man who has built his position on a relationship and has just watched the foundation of that relationship make a sound like a fracture. "You told her to stay away from the family event," Tae-jun said, "because important guests shouldn't have to deal with someone who doesn't belong." It wasn't a question. Dae-sung opened his mouth. "She told me," Tae-jun said, "months ago. She sat across from me and told me, and I—" He stopped. Something crossed his face, brief, controlled, but she saw it. The specific pain of a man acknowledging something he can't unknow. "I told her I didn't think they hated her." No one spoke. "I was wrong," he said, quietly. "To no one in particular, or to all of them simultaneously, or to the room itself, which had been the location of so many of the things he had failed to see." Then Mi-suk spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was not desperate. It had the quality of someone who has been holding a position for a very long time and has decided that the position, regardless of what it's costing her tonight, is still the position she believes. "Tae-jun," she said, "you are my son. I made decisions that I believed were in the interest of this family. This," she gestured, briefly, in a direction that included Amara in the way that a weather system is included in a discussion of the outdoors. "This marriage, I did not choose it. I supported you because you are my son. But my support of you and my acceptance of your wife are not the same thing, and I will not stand here and pretend that I believed, at any point, that this was the right decision for you." The room was absolutely still. Amara stood to Tae-jun's left and felt every word of that settle into her the way cold does. Not sharply, but thoroughly, reaching places you didn't know were exposed. You intercepted messages, Tae-jun said. You fed me false information about my own wife. You made decisions about what I was allowed to know about what happened to her in my own house. His voice was still flat, still controlled. But it was the kind of control that costs something, visibly, the way you can see a structure bearing weight. That's not protection. That's not family decisions. You lied to me. Mi-suk held his gaze. I did what I thought was necessary. For what? For you to eventually see what? The first break in the flatness. Not loud, but there. A fracture in the surface of it. See that the woman I chose was wrong for me? See it the way you saw it, on your timeline, after you'd spent a year and a half making her life in this house as small as you could manage? He shook his head. Once. The gesture of the man closing a door. I need everyone to hear something. He turned. He found Amara. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across that dinner party 8 years ago, with the particular quality of looking that she had always understood as his most honest register. The one that didn't calculate, didn't manage, didn't perform anything, just looked. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. Not for them, he said. For me. For the night you told me what was happening, and I sat across from you and told you I didn't think they hated you. For every conversation after that you decided not to have because I'd already shown you what I'd do with it. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that she heard clearly, something that had the quality of something finally put down after being carried for a long time. You were protecting me from something you thought I wasn't ready to hold, and I let you do that. I shouldn't have. The room held its breath. Then Mi-suk said, quietly, with the certainty of someone making a final statement, he would never choose you over his blood. That is simply not. A voice from the hallway, cold and absolute. Are you sure about that? The voice was Tae-jun's, but different. The version of his voice that didn't explain itself. The version that had ended negotiations and terminated relationships and restructured the circumstances of people who had made the mistake of believing they understood his limits. He stepped forward. He took Amara's hand. Not a dramatic gesture, not performed. He simply found her hand at her side and took it, and the naturalness of it, the completeness of the movement, its absence of hesitation, landed in the room with more force than anything that had been said. Mi-suk looked at their joined hands. Something moved through her face that Amara could not fully name. Not surprise, not quite, because she had believed her own assessment of her son so completely that this moment must have felt less like a surprise than like a law of nature, failing to operate. You were right, Tae-jun said to his mother. I had to choose. He looked at Amara. I choose the woman who never asked me to. Soo-jin made a small sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry, something between the two. Dae-sung said nothing. He had the expression of a man doing a very fast, very private accounting of what this evening was going to cost him and not liking the numbers. Mi-suk stood at the window with her hands still clasped and her chin still elevated and her face doing something complicated and private that Amara watched with a feeling she could not immediately categorize. It was not satisfaction, it was not triumph, it was something quieter and less clean than either of those things. Tae-jun reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He made a call. Brief. 3 sentences. His head of security, Amara understood. She had heard that particular tone, that particular economy of language, once before, directed at a situation that had required immediate restructuring. When he hung up, he looked at the room. Soo-jin, he said, the property in Seodaemun, the account. You have until the end of the month. Soo-jin's face went white. Tae-jun, Dae-sung. He didn't look at his uncle. You're done. Today. Everything that came through me, the position, the access, the arrangements, it's finished. I'll have someone contact you about the logistics. Dae-sung's expression went through several things very quickly and landed on something that looked stripped of everything else, like a man who had gambled on a read of another man's character and discovered that the read was wrong. You can't, he started. I can, Tae-jun said. I just did. Then he turned to Mi-suk. She was watching him. She had been watching him through all of it, with the particular quality of a woman who is absorbing something in real time that she will spend a long time afterward reconstructing into something she can carry. Her son. Standing in the room they had shared his whole life, the room she had managed and maintained and arranged and protected for decades, choosing someone else. Tae-jun looked at his mother for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed slightly, still controlled, but with something in it that was neither cold nor warm, something that occupied the painful register of a person speaking to someone they love about something that love cannot fix. "You should go to your rooms tonight," he said. "We'll talk about the rest of it later." Misuk looked at him. "This is my house," she said. "It's my house," he said. "It's always been my house. You know that." Another silence. She held his gaze for a moment longer. That specific length of time that is a woman deciding whether she has anything left that could change this, finding the answer, and accepting it. Then she turned. She walked past Amara without looking at her. Not with cruelty, not with rage, but with the specific quality of someone who is conserving themselves for what comes next. Her footsteps crossed the hallway. Her door closed. The dining room held, in the aftermath, the complicated air of a space that has contained something large and has not yet adjusted to its absence. Soo-jin left without speaking. Dae-sung followed. The room was quiet. Amara and Tae-jun stood in the dining room of the Kong family estate, and the silence between them was different from the silences the room had held before. It had a different weight, a different temperature, something that was not resolved, and both of them knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She looked at their joined hands. She thought about 18 months. She thought about the table. She thought about the garden and the box necklace and all the evenings she had sat somewhere in this house alone, while 3 rooms away a family had dinner without her. She thought about the night she had told him what was happening, and he had said, "I don't think they hate you," and she had answered, "I hope you're right," and walked upstairs and stood at the bathroom sink and looked at herself in the mirror. She thought about all of that, and then she looked at her husband, this man she had chosen, who had just finally chosen her back in the only way that mattered, in the room where it mattered, in front of the people it mattered in front of, and felt something that was not simple happiness and not simple relief, but something real and complicated and hers. She was not ready to say she was fine. She was not going to say she was fine. But she was still standing, and Tae-jun was still holding her hand. And somewhere above them, in the rooms of a house that was about to become something different than it had been, a family was sitting with the consequences of 18 months of choices they had made in the confidence that the man downstairs would. The house was quiet, in a way it had never been quiet before. Not the quiet of a household settling into its nighttime rhythms, not the ordinary hush of lights going off in sequence and staff retreating and the large mechanical breath of a building exhaling after a day of occupation. This was a different quiet, the quiet of aftermath, the specific silence that fills a space after something large has moved through it, and the air hasn't finished deciding what shape to take now that the thing is gone. Amara stood in the dining room for a moment after Tae-jun released her hand. He had let go gently, not pulling away, just opening his fingers and letting her hand find its own space again, which was something she noticed and filed somewhere she would examine later, when there was room for the small things again. Right now there was no room for anything small. The room was still full of what had just happened in it, and she needed a moment simply to breathe inside that. She went to the kitchen, not because she was hungry, not because she wanted anything from it, but because the kitchen was the room in this house that had the least accumulated weight for her. It was a working room, a practical room, a room that had never been the geography of any particular humiliation or exclusion. It was just a room where food was made. She needed a room like that right now. She filled a glass of water and stood at the counter and drank it slowly and looked at the surface of the counter and thought about nothing for approximately 90 seconds, which was the closest she had been to nothing in a very long time. Then Tae-jun appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had taken off his jacket. His sleeves were rolled partway up, the automatic gesture of a man who has shifted from one mode into another, from the mode that requires the full architecture of his appearance to the mode that is just himself in a kitchen at night. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her without saying anything for a moment. "You should eat something," he said. "I'm not hungry." "I know. You should eat anyway." She looked at him. He moved past her to the refrigerator, opened it, stood in front of it, the way people stand in front of open refrigerators when they're not actually assessing food options but need something to do with their hands and their eyes for a moment. He pulled out things, set them on the counter. He made her something simple, rice, leftover side dishes from the dinner service. The kind of assembly that wasn't cooking exactly, but was the act of feeding someone, which is different. He set it in front of her. She ate. He sat across the counter from her and watched her eat with the expression of a man who has nothing else he needs to accomplish in this moment and knows it, and is, for once, not filling the space with anything. Halfway through, she set down her chopsticks. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay?" "What you did tonight." She kept her voice even. She had gotten very good at even over the past 18 months, and she understood that this was both a skill she had developed and a habit she was going to have to consciously dismantle, because even was not always honest, and she had decided, in the dining room an hour ago, that she was done with the versions of honesty that were shaped for other people's comfort. "It mattered. I need you to know it mattered to me. What you said in there, in front of them. I need you to know that I heard it." Tae-jun looked at her. "But," he said, because he knew her well enough to hear the but even before she'd placed it. "But removing them from the house doesn't remove what happened," she said. "And I need you to understand that. Because I think there's a version of tonight that you walk away from feeling like you fixed something, and I need to tell you that's not what happened. You responded to something. You did the right thing, finally. And it mattered, I mean that. But you didn't fix it. You can't fix the months, Tae-jun. You can't go back to the night I sat across from you and told you what was happening and give me a different answer." He was quiet. "I know that," he said. "I need to make sure you know it in a way that stays," she said. "Not just tonight, when it's all still sharp and you can see exactly what was done. I need you to know it in 3 months when things have calmed down, and the people who were in that room tonight are reaching out to you and telling you their version of what happened and asking you to consider the circumstances and understand their perspective." She looked at him directly. "Because they will. You know they will." "Yes," he said. "I know. And I need to know what you're going to do with that." He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen light was doing something slightly harsh to both of them. The overhead light of a room designed for function, not for conversations like this one, and it showed everything. The tiredness in his face, the specific quality of his eyes when he was not managing what was in them. She had always been able to read him in this light, in the practical rooms, the rooms that didn't perform anything. "I'm going to tell them," he said, "that what they did to you is not something I'm going to be talked into reframing, and then I'm going to come home and be here." She looked at him. "That's it?" she said. "What else is there?" He wasn't being dismissive. He was asking genuinely, with the particular honesty of a man who has stripped things down to what he actually has to offer and is presenting it without inflation. "I can't go back. I can't make what happened to you not have happened. I can tell you I understand what I missed and that I'm not going to miss it again, but I know that me saying that is not the same as you being able to believe it yet. So I'm not going to ask you to believe it." He paused. "I'm going to be here. That's what I have." She looked at the food in front of her, picked up her chopsticks, set them back down. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. He nodded. "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm not saying I won't," she said. "I'm saying I'm not there yet, and I need you to be able to sit with that without turning it into something I have to manage for you." "I can sit with it." She believed him. That was the thing she had always known about Tae-jun, even when everything else was impossible. That the man could sit with difficult things without needing them to resolve before he was ready. It was one of the qualities that had made her trust him, once, before trust had become complicated. It was still there. "Okay," she said. She picked up her chopsticks and finished eating. He stayed across the counter from her until she was done, and then he cleaned up, and she let him, and they moved through the kitchen in the quietly careful way of two people sharing a space that is still reorganizing itself around a new version of their life together. She went upstairs ahead of him. She stood in their bedroom for a long time before doing anything, just stood in it, looked at it. The room that had been her refuge and her cell simultaneously for a year and a half, the room she had cried in silently on too many occasions, and composed herself in before descending into whatever performance the morning required and laying awake in next to a man she loved, who was sleeping peacefully because he didn't know what she knew. She stood in it now and tried to feel what it was like to be in it after tonight, and what it felt like was complicated and exhausting and slightly, cautiously different. Not better. Not yet. Just different. She was washing her face when she heard the knock. Not Tae-jun. He didn't knock on his own bathroom door. This was coming from the bedroom. From the hallway door, a knock with a specific quality she recognized before she consciously identified it. Mi-suk. She dried her face, went to the bedroom door, opened it. Mi-suk stood in the hallway in her robe, which was the first time Amara had ever seen her in it outside the context of mornings, and the detail registered. That Mi-suk had not gone to bed, had been sitting in her rooms in her robe, had come to this door at this hour, which meant that whatever had brought her here had been worked at for some time before she finally stood up and walked down the hall. They looked at each other. Amara did not step back from the doorway. She did not open the door wider in invitation. She stood in it and waited. "I'd like to come in," Mi-suk said. "No," Amara said. Mi-suk absorbed this. Her expression did not collapse or harden. She was a woman with a lifetime of composure behind her, and it held, even now, even in a hallway, at 11 at night in her robe being told no by her daughter-in-law. "I want to say something," Mi-suk said. "You can say it here." A pause. Mi-suk looked at her. Not the assessing look, not the managerial one, not the look of a woman calculating what version of herself to deploy. Something more stripped than that, which Amara registered with the wariness of someone who had been managed by this woman's more composed versions and was not certain what to do with this one. "I underestimated you," Mi-suk said. Amara waited. "I made a determination about who you were and what you were capable of, and I was wrong." She said it with difficulty, not with obvious pain, but with the specific friction of a proud person producing an admission that cost them something real. "Not about everything, but about that." "You're not apologizing," Amara said. "No," Mi-suk said. "I'm not. What I did because I believed it was right for my son. I still believe I was acting in his interest. I believe I was wrong about how I acted, and I believe the methods I chose were—" She stopped, started again. "I should not have lied to him. Whatever I believed about you, lying to my son was wrong. I know that." Amara looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because he won't hear it from me the same way," Mi-suk said. "Because whatever I say to Tae-jun right now will be heard through what happened tonight. And he needs time before he can take anything from me without it going through that filter first. But you—" She paused. "You asked me once what you ever did to deserve the way I treated you." "In the dining room," Amara said. "A few weeks ago." "Yes." Mi-suk held her gaze. "You did nothing. I told you that night that you did nothing. I'm telling you again, here, because I think you should hear it more than once. Not because it repairs anything, but because it's true and you asked, and you deserved a real answer, and I gave you a real answer too late." The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. The estate held them both in its particular hush. This house that had been, for Amara, simultaneously refuge and source of the thing that had most damaged her over the past 18 months. "Where will you go?" Amara said. It was not a gentle question, and she did not mean it as one. It was a real question, a logistical one, because it was going to be a real situation. "I have a sister in Incheon," Mi-suk said. "I'll go there for now." Amara nodded. "Soo-jin?" "She has friends. She'll be fine." A pause. "She's young. Younger than she thinks she is. She learned things from watching me that I'm not." Mi-suk stopped again, looked at something past Amara's shoulder, or at nothing, at the private middle distance of her own accounting. "I'm not proud of what she learned." Amara looked at this woman who had called her daughter in front of a wedding gathering and meant nothing by it, who had intercepted packages and messages and invitations with the patient, coordinated effort of someone protecting something she had decided was hers to protect, who had looked at her in a garden and said you did nothing, and then said it doesn't change anything and somehow meant both completely. She did not feel forgiveness. She was honest with herself about that. What she felt was more complicated and less satisfying than forgiveness, something that recognized, without excusing, that this was a person who had done a harmful thing out of a conviction that was, at its root, about love. Distorted love, short-sighted love. Love that had not bothered to question its own assumptions because it had never had to. But love, underneath all of it, of the limited and damaging kind that certain people are only ever capable of. It didn't excuse it. It just made it human. "Good night, Mi-suk," Amara said. Misuk looked at her for a moment longer. Then she nodded. A single, small nod that contained something Amara could not fully name, something between acknowledgement and grief, and the particular dignity of a person walking away from a situation they created and cannot unmake. She turned and walked back down the hallway. Amara watched her go. She closed the door. She stood in the bedroom for a moment, then went and sat on the bed and pressed her palms together between her knees, and stayed there, just stayed, letting the silence of the room settle around her like something she could finally stop fighting. Tae-jun came up 20 minutes later. He came in quietly, moved through the room with the careful economy of a man who is not sure what he's walking into and is respecting the uncertainty. He saw her sitting on the bed. He sat beside her. Not close, not far, the distance of someone making space available rather than taking it. Misuk came to the door, she said. He looked at her. I know, he said. I saw her in the hallway. She said she underestimated me. He was quiet for a moment. Did it help? He asked, genuinely. I don't know yet, Amara said. Maybe later. He nodded. They sat in the room together, and the night held them in it, and neither of them tried to make the silence into something more than it was, which was two people sitting with the weight of a difficult evening in the room they had shared for a year and a half, and would share differently from this point forward. I want to leave this house, Amara said. Tae-jun didn't move. Not leave it like... She shook her head. I don't want to leave you. I want to leave this house. I want us to have a place that is ours, that doesn't have the history of this one in every room, where I can stand in the kitchen, or sit at the table, or walk through the front door, and not... She stopped. Not carry all of it every time. He thought about it. She appreciated that he didn't answer immediately, that he gave it the weight of actual consideration rather than the reflexive agreement of a man trying to resolve his own guilt. Yes, he said. Yes? Yes. He looked at her. We'll find something. Whatever you want it to look like, wherever you want it to be. We'll find it. She looked at him. You built your whole operation around this estate, she said. The security, the infrastructure. I'll rebuild it, he said, simply, without drama. The way Tae-jun said things when he had decided them, not as promises, which could be qualified, but as statements of future fact. It's a building. We can build other buildings. She felt something move in her chest. Not the large thing she had felt in the dining room when he had taken her hand. That had been a seismic thing, a thing that moved the ground. This was smaller, and in some ways more significant, the specific feeling of being believed in a practical matter by someone who has the means to act on it. The feeling of someone saying, yes, your comfort matters enough to inconvenience me significantly, and I'm telling you that plainly, without negotiation. She had forgotten what that felt like. Or maybe she had never had it in this house. She lay down. Not in the dramatic way, not in the way of someone giving up. In the way of someone who has been standing up inside themselves for a very long time and has finally found a moment where the cost of staying upright exceeds what is necessary. She lay on her side and looked at the room and breathed. Tae-jun lay beside her, on his back, not touching her, not reaching for anything, just there. The warm, solid fact of him in the dark, which had once been the most uncomplicated thing in her life, and had become complicated by everything that surrounded it, and might become uncomplicated again, slowly, in a home that hadn't yet been chosen. I need to tell you something, she said, to the ceiling, to the room, to the specific quality of darkness that had a person she loved in it. I thought about leaving, not recently, months ago, before I found the package, before tonight. I thought about it seriously. He was quiet. I know, he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the ceiling. You knew? I could feel it, he said. I didn't know the specific shape of it, but I could feel something tightening between us, and I didn't know how to ask about it, because asking would have meant acknowledging that I already knew something was wrong, and I had already told you I didn't think it was wrong, and... He stopped, let out a breath. I convinced myself it was adjustment. I kept reaching for the version of things that required the least of me, and I know that. I'm not going to spend the next year explaining to you why I did it, but I know that I did. She looked at him. Why are you telling me you know? She said. Most people wouldn't tell me that. Because you've been honest with me tonight in a way that cost you something, he said. And because I think I think the reason we're still here, the reason you're lying in this bed next to me instead of somewhere I don't have access to you, is because you were always more honest than the situation deserved, and I owe you the same." She was quiet for a moment. "I stayed because I love you," she said. "Not because I'm patient, not because I'm strong. I stayed because I love you, and because leaving felt like letting them win, and I didn't want to give them that. I want you to know that, because I think you might be constructing a version of me that is more graceful than I actually am." He turned his head and looked at her. "I know exactly who you are," he said. She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. "Then you also know that I'm going to need a long time. Not forever, but a long time." "I know." "And you're going to have to earn it back," she said. "Not perform it, earn it. There's a difference, and I need you to understand that I know the difference, and I'll be able to tell which one is happening." "I know," he said again, and then, "I'm going to earn it." She believed him. She believed him not with the clean, uncomplicated belief of someone who has never had reason to doubt, but with the harder, more durable belief of someone who has examined the evidence and found, underneath everything that had gone wrong, a core that held. The core of this man, his particular quality of commitment once he had actually committed, his inability to do things halfway once he had decided to do them, the same quality that had made him formidable in his professional life, and that she had always known, always, would make him formidable as a husband if he ever fully arrived at it. He was arriving now, late, costly late, but arriving. She turned back to face the ceiling. "There's a neighborhood," she said, after a while. "In Mapogu. Near where you had your office before, the first one. There's a street I used to walk on when I was in the graduate program, and I always—" She stopped. Something small and complicated moved through her. "I always thought about living there. The light is good in the afternoons, there are trees on the street. Normal things. I don't need to be somewhere impressive. I just need to be somewhere that's mine." Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. "Mapogu," he said. "Yes. That's where I was sitting across a dinner table thinking you were the most direct person I had ever met in my life." "I know," she said. A pause. "That works," he said. The night settled around them. The estate held its particular silence, the heavy, absorbed silence of old walls and high ceilings and decades of accumulated presence. Amara lay in it and thought about all the nights she had lain in this same room, hearing that same silence as something that excluded her, as the silence of a place that was not hers and knew it. She thought about what it was going to feel like to sleep in a silence that was just silence, not weighted, not watching, just the ordinary quiet of a place where she belonged because she had chosen it, and it had been chosen for her. She was not there yet, but she could feel the distance to it, and the distance was not infinite. At some point she slept. She didn't feel herself crossing into it. One moment the ceiling was above her and her thoughts were still moving, and then the ceiling was gone and she was somewhere else. She slept deeply and without the particular vigilance that had been her version of sleep for the past year and a half. The sleep of someone who is never quite all the way down because some part of them is always listening for what the house might be doing. She slept like someone who had stopped listening. In the morning, the house was changed. Not physically. The same furniture, the same light through the same windows, the same particular quality of morning that the estate produced filtered through those walls at this hour. But the arrangement of its inhabitants was different. Maisuk's rooms were quiet with a different quality than usual. Not the quiet of someone sleeping in or moving softly, but the quiet of rooms that had been left. Sujin had gone in the night. Amara found this out when she passed the empty corridor and saw the specific quality of absence that a room produces when the person who occupies it has taken their things. Daesung's car was not at the front. She stood in the main hallway in the morning and felt the house around her and felt for the first time that the space was not performing anything. It was simply a building. Expensive, well-maintained, historically significant to the man who owned it, and psychologically significant to the woman who had been asked to call it home. Just a building. She went to the kitchen and made coffee. Not the way the staff made it, not the formal way of mornings that had house protocol around them. She made it herself, the way she made coffee when she was alone, the way she would make it in a kitchen in Mapogu someday soon, standing in afternoon light on a street with trees. Tae-jun found her there. He was already dressed, not in a suit, in the casual clothes of a man who has decided that today is not a professional day, but a reckoning day. A day for sitting in kitchens and drinking coffee and doing the hard, quiet work of beginning. He poured himself a cup from what she'd made without asking if that was all right, which it was, and stood beside her at the counter. My security team found 3 other things, he said. She looked at him. What kind of things? Invitations, from about 14 months ago. A women's group in Gangnam that organized networking events. One of Dae-sung's contacts forwarded something to you through the house account. And 2 personal messages. One from your friend Yemi in London. He paused. The other from your mother. The kitchen went very quiet. Amara set down her coffee cup. From my mother, she said. 8 months ago, he said. She'd been trying to reach you through the house line because your mobile was in repair. Do you remember? You had the cracked screen and it was in the shop for 4 days. She remembered. She remembered the 4 days. She remembered her mother trying to reach her, and the call finally coming through on day 3, her mother saying she had tried earlier and something had gone wrong with the connection. She had assumed it was international line issues. She had not let herself think. What did she say? Amara said. Her voice was very steady, and she was aware that the steadiness was doing a significant amount of work. That she was worried, that she hadn't heard enough from you, that something in your voice on the last call felt off, and she wanted to know if you were really okay. He paused. That she loved you. That's it. Amara stood at the kitchen counter and felt something move through her that was different from everything that had moved through her the night before. Those had been large things: anger, grief, relief, the complicated reckoning of a marriage coming back to itself. This was smaller, and in some ways the most devastating. The image of her mother, in Atlanta, picking up a phone, trying to reach her daughter, who was not okay, and the message not arriving. Her mother, asking if she was really okay. And Amara, 8 months ago, on the other end of an incomplete reach, not knowing the question had been asked. She turned away from the counter. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Just a moment. Just long enough. And then she turned back and picked up her coffee. I need to call her, she said. I know. Today? Now, before anything else. Yes, he said. Do that. She called her mother from the East Garden. Her garden. The small one. The one that caught afternoon light. The one she had claimed in the early months because no one else wanted it. She sat on the iron bench, the same bench she had sat on across from Dae-sung the afternoon. He told her to make herself absent. And she called her mother, and her mother answered on the second ring the way she always answered, with the voice of a woman who has been half waiting for this call, regardless of when it came. Baby, her mother said. And Amara, who had not cried in front of anyone in this house in 18 months, who had trained herself out of it with the specific thoroughness of a person who understood that tears in this particular context would be used against her, who had stood in bathrooms and sat in gardens and ridden alone in cars, and allowed herself the private relief of it, but never, never where any of them could see. Amara cried. She sat in the iron bench in the east garden of the Kong family estate and cried with her mother on the phone and said everything she hadn't said in 8 months, and everything she hadn't said in 18, and her mother listened and made the sounds that only mothers make, the ones that don't need to be translated, the ones that say, I hear you, I'm here, you are not alone in this, and Amara heard all of it. After a while, the crying stopped, the way it does. Not because the reason for it stops, but because the body has finished with it for now and simply returns to its regular functioning. You're leaving that house? Her mother said. Yes, Amara said. We both are. And him? Her mother said. Careful, because she was a woman who had asked the right questions her whole life and knew the difference between I'm leaving the house and I'm leaving him. Where is he in all of this? He's here, Amara said. He was very late, but he's here. A pause. And you? Her mother said. Not what he's doing, you. Amara looked at the garden. The morning light was in it differently than afternoon light. Cooler, bluer, less of the warmth that made it hers, but still the same garden, still the same hedges, still the bird that moved in them periodically, without ever quite revealing itself. I'm tired, she said. I'm really tired. But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. Her mother was quiet for a moment. That's enough for right now, her mother said. It was. The months that followed did not have the quality of a clean recovery, because real things don't recover cleanly. They have the quality of incremental, uneven, sometimes backsliding work, of two people deciding every day, not once but daily, that they were going to keep doing this. Tae-jun found a place in Mapogu. He brought her to it on a Saturday afternoon without telling her where they were going, which was characteristic of him. The preference for showing over-describing, for the thing itself rather than the anticipation of the thing. He parked the car on the tree-lined street she had mentioned in the dark and walked her to the door of the building and gave her the key without ceremony, and she stood in the empty apartment with its afternoon light and its ordinary rooms and its windows that looked out onto a street where normal people went about their normal days, and she stood in the middle of it and felt something she had not felt since before she moved into the Kang estate. Spacious. Not in the physical sense, the apartment was smaller than anything in the estate, significantly. But there was a quality in its emptiness that was not loneliness but possibility. And it was the first time she had stood in a space and felt possibility rather than accumulated history, and she stood in it for a long time before she turned to Tae-jun and nodded. "This," she said. "This," he agreed. They moved in 3 weeks later. Tae-jun restructured what needed to be restructured. The security arrangements, the operational infrastructure, the various accommodations his previous life had required that now needed to function from a different address in a different neighborhood. He did it without complaint and without the particular performance of someone demonstrating their sacrifice. He did it the way he did things when he had decided them, efficiently, completely, without looking back. Amara called her mother every Sunday. She joined the women's networking group in Gangnam, the one whose invitation had been intercepted 14 months earlier. She found, in that room, two people who became real to her over the following months, who gave her something the estate had systematically removed: the ordinary, normalizing presence of people who saw her without agenda. She was not immediately whole. There were mornings she woke with the particular heaviness of someone whose body had decided to process something that her waking mind had filed away. There were evenings when she sat across from Tae-jun at a table that was theirs. No family, no performance, just dinner in their own kitchen, and felt the complicated texture of trusting him again, the way it required daily renewal rather than arrival. She had not expected trust to feel like a practice rather than a state, and learning that it did was its own adjustment. She was honest with him about all of it. That was the thing that changed most fundamentally between them, not the external circumstances, not the removal of his family from their daily life, not the new apartment on the tree-lined street, but this. She stopped editing what she said to him for the purpose of protecting him from it. She told him when something was hard. She told him when she was in a difficult day, when the accumulated weight of the past year was sitting on her in a way she couldn't think her way out of. She told him when she was grateful and when she was not, and when she couldn't tell the difference. He received it, every time. Without the old resistance, without the pull toward the comfortable interpretation, without the face she had learned to recognize as the face of a man selecting the explanation that cost him least. He sat with the hard things she said, and he did not try to resolve them before they were ready to be resolved. And he did not make her discomfort into a problem she needed to manage for him. He was earning it. She was letting him. Misuk called once, 3 months after the night in the dining room, from her sister's home in Incheon. Amara answered because she had decided in advance that she would, because she had thought about what kind of person she wanted to be on the other side of this, and had landed on someone who answered the phone. Misuk asked how she was. She said she was working on it. Misuk asked about Tae-jun. She said he was well, and that she would tell him she called. There was a pause, the kind of pause that contains something a person has not yet decided how to release. "I was wrong about you," Misuk said. "I said that to you in the hallway. I want to say it again in the light." Amara sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Not, "it's okay." Not, "I understand." Just "thank you," which was what she had and what she could give, and it was enough. She told Tae-jun about the call that evening. He listened. "What do you want to do with it?" he said. He always asked that now, when, "What do you want? What do you need? What do you think?" And she was still adjusting to being asked, still recalibrating toward the version of herself that answered without measuring the response first. "Nothing yet," she said. "Maybe something later. I don't know." He nodded. He put his arm around her on the couch, their couch, in their apartment, on the street with trees. and they watched something unremarkable on television that neither of them would remember afterward. And the evening was ordinary, which was the thing it had taken her the longest to understand she had been missing. Not the grand gestures, not the dramatic reckonings, not even the particular intensity of what had happened in the dining room of the estate, the significance of which she would not diminish or forget. Ordinary. An evening like an evening. A couch, a person she loved, the sound of the city outside a window on a street she had once walked as a younger version of herself who didn't know yet what was coming. 6 months after the night in the dining room, on a Sunday afternoon in February, when the light was doing something specific and favorable with the apartment windows, Tae-jun pulled out the chair beside him at their kitchen table. He did it the way he did most things, without ceremony, without narration, just the act itself. He pulled out the chair and looked at her, and she understood without anything being said that the gesture was deliberate, that it was a reference to a dynamic that had defined too much of what happened to her for too long. She sat down. He sat beside her. They were quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of people who have come through something difficult and arrived somewhere that is not unmarked by it, but is, despite everything, theirs. "Mapogu," she said. "Mapogu," he agreed. She looked at the window, at the street below, at the trees on it, bare in February, doing the patient thing that trees do in winter. Not gone, just waiting, holding their form against the season until the conditions changed. Nobody was going to take this seat away. Nobody was going to take anything from her again without a fight she was fully prepared to have, with a man beside her who was finally, actually, completely on her side. She was not the same woman who had stood at the top of the stairs watching her husband leave and felt the house change behind her. She was someone who had gone through that woman and come out the other side, harder in some places, softer in others, stripped of the particular kind of hope that trusts without evidence, and left with the more durable kind that trusts because of it. She reached across the table and picked up her coffee. She drank it in her own kitchen, in her own home, next to the man she had chosen, and who had finally, at a cost that neither of them would minimize, chosen her back. Outside, on the street with trees, the ordinary world went on. It was enough. It was, she understood now, exactly enough.